Arirang is the song we sang, soaked with sorrow. Arirang is about journey. Arirang is about dreams. Never give up, never give in, never stop hoping. Arirang Part 2, The Korean-American Dream.
All I knew basically that they had some restrictive covenants there. But how do you beat it? I'm still a uniform. Here I am, risking my life to save your house. And you're trying to kick me out of mine. I said, the reason I'm here is because I'm wondering why you decide to restrict me and kick me out of my house. He says, I like you, Dr. Kim, but if I let you live there, the Jews and the niggers will move in. I use those words because that's the words of you. That's, well, I'll see you in court. We won the case in the Supreme Court of the United States, the final, in June '49. I always admired the kid in class that could run faster than I could jump higher than I could, and I thought, if I could become a sports hero, they would respect me more, and I would be a part of the mainstream of American way of life. And so when I first started, they said you had to be a white man. First you had to break the prejudice of that only a Caucasian could win an Olympic diving title because a Caucasian was taller, more gracefully built, and more artistic. 16 years I waited for this moment. You know, I'm the last diver, and all I remember is hitting the tower, and all of a sudden hitting the water, I was tingling all over. So when I broke the surface and I looked around, I was confused, and I saw the diving score, 10, 9, 9.5, 9, 9, and a 7. But it said that second time in history a man walked on water.
I finished my master's from University of Illinois. So, I want to become a reporter, you know what I mean? So I was writing letters, no answer came. I wrote, over a year, 100, maybe 2-3 nibblings. But I got hired by some nameless small paper in West Virginia, and the publisher happened to be a craziest white man I know. He was a living abolitionist. One Indian diplomat was going to Florida for vacation. At that time, there was no interstate. So he had to drive through West Virginia, god-awful West Virginia, you know what I mean? And it is, real, poverty and racism out there. And they wouldn't let him get in and eat the hamburger. So he wrote, a nasty letter to State Department. So State Department, sent a copy to my publisher. And 1958, out of blue, he said, Lee, you get the hell out of here and open up every goddamn Jim Crow restaurant. So I said, yes, sir. And I did my share. I enjoyed it. That's how I became a civil rights reporter.
Where the first generation of Koreans had fixed their sights on the independence of Korea, succeeding generations turned to the possibilities and problems of the new land, they made remarkable achievements as individuals, but were a small group, practically anonymous, in danger of disappearing.
In Boston, they didn't know what I was. They had never heard of Korean in 1947. They thought I was Filipino. And I said, no. And they said, well, in that case, you must be Chinese or Japanese. And I said, no, I'm Korean. And they said, where is Korea? Of course, in 1950, everybody knew where Korea was.
The first day I arrived in Korea, I found my uncle. There's a place about the size of a piano box, just enough for a little cot. He rushes over and he grabbed me and he hugged me. My God, my nephew. And so when we all calmed down, well, he goes back to the cot and he digs under the tatami mat. He gets my picture out. And we said, why do you have it buried? He said, because I was afraid the North Koreans would find his picture and kill him.
Bong Hyun, after getting a taste of Russian communist influence in northern Korea, walked 150 miles through December weather into South Korea.
Roughly 1.5 million people escaped to South Korea prior to the Korean War. I was one of them. My family was one of them. Oh, it was really rough, but we were smart. We knew a da-da-da, la-da-da, la-da-da, la-da-da. Do you remember the tune? That was a Russian song. And the Russian guards were with the Korean guards all over the place. And when we were passing by, we were singing da-da-da, la-da-da, 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 la-da-da. Russians were so happy to hear their song. They just joined us in singing. So we stayed there for 5 minutes singing together and goodbye.
With help from American missionaries, he became a medical doctor, then returned to the north with the American military force. When the American army was overrun by enemy troops, Dr. Hyun helped evacuate 100,000 fellow North Koreans, mostly Christians, many with entrepreneurial skills, to the south.
I went out there, and of course, I saw Marines, and I offered my help. And they were really appreciative of, because I spoke English. They issued me a field uniform, gave me a 45, and I was part of the U.S. Marines, so I had access to just about everything.
I came from a family of 8. Most of the time we were hungry. I got abused by adult. Then my ex-husband come along, so I'm gonna rescue you. I get out of this environment. We just start new life for you. That's what America was my dream in the world.
The Korean War sets up a first in matrimonial relations. For on the ship is Sergeant John Morgan of Bremerton, Washington, and his bride, young Soon.
And so it was that from the chaos of war, Koreans began to renew a migration that had been suspended since the U.S. Asian Exclusion Acts of the 1920s.
So now it's Mrs. Young Soon Morgan facing the cameras and given one of America's traditional family welcomes.
The Hope family, farmers from Oregon, adopted 8 war orphans. Soon, airplanes filled with babies were flying to new parents across the United States. Wars in Asia and the African-American civil rights movement posed the same question. Would America honor its professed belief that all are created equal?
The United States could no longer afford to be a racist nation, you know, keeping other groups in preference of the Northeast Europeans only. That's just bad. It looks bad.
In 1965, at the height of the Civil Rights Movement, U.S. immigration law was changed from its traditional white European bias to being essentially colorblind. A congressman who co-authored the immigration law predicted that few Asians would move to America since they had no family ties.
As a kid, what I remember is suddenly my cousins are all coming over and my aunt from Korea, and my dad and mom are sponsoring them. This is what I remember, because I remember trips to the airport, and oh, you're going to meet this cousin now, and then you're going to meet this cousin, and then you're going to meet that cousin, and then you're going to meet your aunt. You know, they all ended up staying, all being naturalized, all having family here.
For a time, America's possibilities seemed limitless, a land that was nearly perfect.
I was playing basketball, and they started calling me kind of names, you know, about my race, etc., and shoved me after I was up for a rebound. You know, I said, please say sorry, in the broken language that I could kind of muster up. And he says no, and he grabbed my collar, and in 3 seconds I had him on the ground. I'm actually a third-degree black belt.
As the new migration got underway in the 1970s, South Korea was quickly becoming the urbanized industrial society that it is today. After moving to Seoul with rising expectations, Koreans moved on to Los Angeles, Chicago, or New York with rising expectations. Some who had fled the North made a second move to America. Some fled the repression of authoritarian regimes in South Korea.
I remember the smell of tear gas in our home. I remember my uncle really dropping out of sight for months at a time, fleeing from the police, agents pounding on our door. Those are pretty powerful memories to keep with you when you think about Korea.
After I came back to United States in 1960 and in 61, within less than a year, the Korean military junta Park Chung-hee came in, and next thing I know, my father was arrested, Park Chung-hee, and I was not allowed to go back. If I went back, I would have been in jail with my father. My father was in jail for over 3 months, and he was on the house arrest for 14 years. So I finished my graduate degree here, and I taught, and I got married.
Family members sponsored family members, most of all the GI brides, who seem to have functioned as invisible queen bees.
I had a hostess bar. Wherever I can make money, I used to send all the time to the family to help them. You know, kind of, I feel like I'm Robin Hood sometimes. I want to make money and help these people. I brought my mother first, because she is very close to me. After mother, father, brothers, sisters, and brothers, wife, children. I guess I counted about 18 people. Then non-relative is, you know, what, 10?
In the early 1970s, the migration focused on Los Angeles. The area signed Koreatown was transformed from a seedy adjunct of downtown into a thriving community. Similarly, Koreans were widely credited with reversing the urban decay of Flushing in Queens, New York. 32nd Street in Manhattan became Korea Way, a center of culture, business, and cuisine. The main street of Palisades Park, New Jersey, became almost wholly Korean-owned and operated. 250,000 Koreans immigrated to America in the 1970s, and 1/3 of a million in the 1980s. The new migration encompassed widely diverse people who were lumped together in America by the word Korean. A majority were college educated, many in the sciences and the professions. All were products of a nation with a powerful work ethic. And in America, they did what they had to do to survive and get ahead.
It was about a year into our kind of lives in the United States, and they've had it. You know, they fed up with this lower, minimum wage jobs, not what they're used to, not really, why they came to the States for.
핀트, 청소, 리코스타 마켓, helper, everything. Yeah.
They were educators in Korea, different society, culture. The language barrier couldn't really have them do the same thing in the States.
Labor working, sewing, hamburger, sandwich. Korean is I don't know, so business I don't know, so just education, working Korea.
My parents were like, we're going to empty the fridge, just eat everything we have left in the fridge because we're going to go back. They even called, those companies that do the moving things, so everything was packed.
A couple of days, I think, right after they made that decision, I had been elected as kind of the student representative of my class in 3rd grade. So I was very excited and came home and told my parents.
And she's like, oh, I could do anything, it doesn't matter what I do as long as, that he succeeds and that he meets their expectation. They're willing to just cope and overcome whatever work they have to do.
If you run your own business, you are not at the bottom, you are at the top. You are your own boss. We call it, 사장님. It's called the Korean name of president.
The president of Jumbo Liquors had been a contractor in Korea.
What size? Pie? 그 장애만 없다면은 이거보단 그게 훨씬 나아요.
She thinks that if there is no language barrier, they may consider change the business.
Better is a house building. 9 to 9이니까.
9 to 9이니까.
Friday하고 Saturday는 9 to 10.
Hello, how are you?
가족은 이제 늘 같이 못하니까 애기 볼 때 같이 못하니까 그런 거 좀 속상하고 요즘 버지니아로 가면 한 5일만 일하는 거라고 주말에. Found this? How many did they have a bonus box? Oh, okay. They love.
As the Korean immigrant population grew, word spread that certain types of businesses were readily accessible and could produce good incomes.
Actually, when they are selling fruit and vegetables, you don't even need to speak English. If you go market, you buy good products, display nicely, there is no language barriers. You just good merchandise bring in stores. They just see these oranges is good. Then they buy these oranges.
Koreans became 10 times more likely than the average American to own a grocery.
When I start out with this business, I didn't have anything. So that time, I had 18 credit cards. I drew the $85,000. I'm never gonna forget this one. I drew from $85,000 from my credit card. Very lucky I had that many credit cards.
My sister was here earlier than me, and my parents passed away, and my big brother said, let's go to America. I just graduated from high school, and I like the sound of America. That's why I came. I think I had $30.
If the business was not a grocery, it was likely a gas station or a dry cleaning shop.
The springtime is more busy, more sewing and more clothing coming. So usually I work 7:30 to 7 o'clock. I think this is drugstore. I'm paid half to factory, but sewing is my own work. It's more business. Sometimes when I promise a lot of sewing for customer, I took to the house, my home, and I drawing, measure, and cutting, just ready to sew and bring back. So sometimes I work until 11 o'clock.
By 1990, 1/4 of all Korean Americans were self-employed, the highest self-employment rate out of 99 ethnic groups in America. Many more worked in family businesses. For their independence, they paid in safety.
I got robbed several times, but one time the guy came through over here and held me up. But most of the time the American or the people is bigger than me. It's hard to get in over here. But I don't have any trouble. It's not even take 1 second to get up to my cash register.
We need the money. Where is the money? 아무 말도 없고 기회도 없고 시간도 없이 그냥 나타나서 그냥 쏘는 거야.
And he got one shot. It went through from here to the other side of his body.
My father was robbed at a gunpoint once. I advised him to sell the store immediately after that. I said, you know, you didn't come here to die. You know, what is this? We can make a living without having to put your life at danger.
If you go to the United States, ask the people, Korean people, why you come to the United States. The 100% of them said for the education of the children.
They wanted me to kind of give it my best, and that was the mentality I took all the way through high school. You know, in senior year of my high school, I applied early action to Harvard, and that's where you kind of get in the forms early and you get admitted early. And so during lunch break, me and two of my best friends hopped into a car and drove home because I knew when the mail was coming in, opened the envelope, you know, screamed, rolled around the lawn, and I called my parents, and I think my mother and father, I think, started to cry.
All the difficulties that she has gone through in the States just completely disappeared like a bubble, and it just, she couldn't hope for anything better.
On the same day that Steve Chung graduated cum laude from Harvard, his sister, Christy Chung, graduated from Harvard School of Dental Medicine, cum laude. Proceeds from the Jumbo liquor store sent 4 children through college.
Thank you. 근데 뭐 우리 한국 사람들은 그게 배직이니까
네.
우리가 저렇게 자라왔고 자식을 위해서 모든 것을 해주는 것이.
네. But she thinks that that's the just normally Koreans do that. Koreans just sacrifice for their children, so she doesn't mind it.
The sacrifices of parents were often made out of sight and out of mind. Many Koreans made long commutes from work to home late at night.
This ambition for upward social mobility, to be successful in their own estimation of things within American society, is a lot of what drives this dispersal of Koreans out of initial immigrant communities into the suburbs very quickly, whether in Southern California or wherever they may be.
Increasingly, residents, amplified by mass media, complained that Korean entrepreneurs took profits from the inner city but were not part of it. Even the Los Angeles Koreatown is less than 20% Korean, the largest ethnic group being Latino. The civil rights reporter K.W. Lee became the crusading editor of Koreatown, desperately attempting to build understanding among the ethnic groups of Los Angeles.
Make money, money, money. Problem is we are isolating ourselves from Latino and black neighbors in the inner city where future of Korean immigrants lies.
People aren't working. There's no hope for work on the horizon. Nobody in the establishment is moving to get the situation under control. Hey, you know, go out and get some of mine.
On the night of April 29, 1992, news photographer Hyung-Won Kang heard on his car radio the first reports of a riot.
You know, I'm a street journalist. You know, I cover what happens in the streets. So I drove into Florence and Normandy and rolled up all my windows, and immediately all the bottles and bricks were flying, landing on the back of my car. And from that point on, for the next 3 days and nights, I was out covering riots, which eventually spread into Koreatown.
I remember driving into work on the 30th. Very little traffic on the streets. The sky looked very, very gray and ashen. I mean, there were so many fires burning in this city that the whole sky, the air right in front of your car looked gray and smoky.
This was a situation where a fireman never made it there, so the shop owner next door started putting out the fire with a bucket.
It really was unbelievable. I could not believe that this was Los Angeles, California, USA in the year of 1992, falling apart right in front of my eyes.
From my personal witnessing of the whole thing, there were no police presence first 2 days, at least first 2 days of the riots.
All the minorities in LA know about each other through what? White media, which is built by the ignorance and the arrogance. And we, the Koreans and the blacks, became unwilling, unpaid players in a Roman arena at the whims of these media profiteers.
We thought that many politicians were friends of the Korean community. Nobody came. And that was the moment that we finally realized we're alone. Unless you help yourself, no one's going to come and help you.
They were walking up on top of here, across there. They had literally circled the wagons. They had their cars lined up along here. And it was great because nobody else was going to be coming out to protect their stores. But yeah, I know many people think it's a very negative image.
The biggest racial riot in American history. It literally wiped out the significant segment of the hole in the wall Korean immigrants who had nothing to do with the pathology of South Central. I saw, this Korean woman just looking up the sky and said, "Why us?"
This is Edward Song Lee's mom, Mrs. Lee, visiting his grave in Forest Lawn, Hollywood. She buys fresh flowers from the flower mart in downtown LA and goes to visit the grave every week.
The only martyr, rising from the ashes of the ruins of the Koreatown is an 18-year-old kid. His name's Eddie Lee. He's a homie. He's a native of Koreatown. So I learned a lesson. In America, the humblest of humble can become the noblest of noble.
Our people, even through difficulty and trial, have not given up. Help us to win over this trial.
이 땅 위에 정의가 승리한다는 것을 만천하에 보이게 하여 주옵소서.
And show the world, Lord, that there will be justice in this land.
I say that Korean America was born in April of 1992. not to diminish previous generations. My parents and grandparents were previous generations. But Korean America, that consciousness was awakened in April of '92.
In America, you have to become a part of a community. And you have to be a constant part of the process of making the community better.
T.S. Chung had moved from Korea to Los Angeles at 15, gone to college, and become active in the community.
I coined the term 1.5 generation to refer to people like myself, people who were born in Korea, but who immigrated to the U.S. usually as a teenager, and who is bicultural and bilingual. That whole idea is that you're in between first and second generation, so you're supposed to bridge that gap between the two generations that exist within our community.
It's still the community in building, community in making, and then community in transition from immigrant and guest status to a part of this country. So we want to make sure that you're here to live. You're not here as a guest. That you have to be a U.S. citizen. Unless you're a U.S. citizen, you cannot vote. Unless you're a citizen, you cannot even get a job and participate.
The American capital is Washington, D.C. The American flag has stars and 뭐가 있습니까?
Young Soon Kim had carried adoptee babies under each arm to cover her airfare to the United States. She practiced modern dance 12 hours a day, performed with the top American companies, then turned to the themes of Korean America.
Dance as your life depends on, not just when you feel like it, and every movement. It is not just about your physical movement. Your mind, your body, and soul has to be committed with what you do. Only one sky means everybody lives under one sky. And I included with the Korean traditional music team and dance team and African American music and dance team, and I merged them.
Instances of prejudice have refused to go away. Korean American businesses were targeted in Palisades Park, New Jersey. An all-white council required businesses to have English signage. Then it passed a curfew regulating night business. The curfew expressly did not apply to a so-called American-style diner, which was allowed to stay open all night. P.J. Kim, the first Asian American president of the student body at nearby Princeton University, received a call for help.
I thought, what would happen if someone like myself, who was blessed with all these opportunities, who had fluency with the English language, if someone like me didn't get involved, what would happen to those people in Palisades Park? When the town lost the ordinance issue and they were forced to make it apply to all businesses, not just American-style diners, some of the comments made at the meeting, made by some of the more elderly residents of this town, said, I fought in the Korean War for you, and now you're trying to take over my town. There were also comments made there along the lines of, you should just go back home.
Michelle Kim was valedictorian of an area high school who had gone on to Rutgers University.
I was disturbed. I do have family in this area, and they were very much affected by what was happening in the town. If in this day and age, with all the efforts that are being made for Koreans and for minorities and for Asians to enter into the mainstream, to see us set back seemingly so many years hurt.
We are very proud of her. She is representing not only our family, she's representing the Korean community. And so when I say, yes, that's it, that's right, Michelle, go right ahead. And we are all the way there to support her.
The first generation of Asian Americans came here to this country with a vision. But they faced barriers of language and culture. But as a second generation, we don't have that excuse. We need to carry out this vision by being a part of the community, by being an active part, an active voice in this community. Hear what we are doing today.
Message on the window that read, "Go home, Koreans." Let me tell you this. This is our hope.
If there is a model of success, the Jewish Americans model is a simple one, which is, it's too late to make a friend when you need it. You must make friends before you need them. You must reach out, you must coalesce, you must build relationships, you must have friends in high places and important places, but you need them way before you ever need to call on them for help.
We understood very early on that we were a minority in this country and that our own sense of well-being and security was dependent on a broader pluralist vision in American society. When we began to realize the growth of Asian American communities, and particularly the Korean American community, we saw a potential coalition ally in the Korean American community.
At the grassroots level, store owner Kay Kim has emerged as a role model for improved customer relations.
I care about my neighborhood, so they care about me too. So I'm going to put every picture, everybody move in, I'm going to put it up. And then after they see their own picture, they were very happy and they are very proud of it too. Their parents, and they bring their parents.
She done known me since I was about knee high. My mom has stayed down here for a long time. And this lady right here, her and her husband, they've been so nice just to everybody in the neighborhood, you know. Every time you come in, they always, how you doing, you know, and how your mama, how your sister, you know. And that's just the, you know, they set the environment for the neighborhood.
If you go into her store, you'll see all the photos up of the neighborhood kids and the neighborhood families. And I think that they kind of treat her almost as a surrogate mother or big sister or something, because she treats everybody else the same way.
And every time you talk to Kay, it's the same message, a message of positiveness. You follow what I'm saying? For all people.
물론 개 중에는 그런 사람도 없잖아요. 있지요. 한 사람도 뭐 금방 부자가 되는 사람도 있지요. 저 생각도 그래요. 하지만은 어렵게 해도 안 되는 사람이 더 많다고 생각하죠.
In Los Angeles, young Korean Americans are organizing Latino workers and Korean immigrant workers simultaneously in a single effort.
글쎄 제가 생각하기로는 말을 듣기로는 뭐 노동의 일이라도 그 좀 대가성이 있는 거로 알고 왔었는데 실질적으로 해봤으니까는 해보니까는 그게 아니었어요. 노조가 있으면 좋지 않겠냐는 생각에서 참여를 하게 돼 있었죠.
Yo tengo el contrato que hice con ellos.
Sí. Probablemente ellos tienen personas que hablan.
We do have 3 trilingual Korean staff who speaks Spanish, English, Korean, and definitely Korean American community is people of color and minority, and therefore coalition building with other community that are in same boat is crucial.
The year 2000 U.S. Census counted well over 1 million people of Korean ancestry in the United States. The fastest growing areas are in the Old South, a last frontier of the migration. 1/5 of all Korean Americans live in such places as Huntsville, Alabama.
I came from Seoul, Korea. My sister used to live here. She invited us to come to the United States. That's why we end up here. To me, I don't think any problem in Huntsville. This is kind of, I understand I'm a member of Chambers of Commerce. They said about 160 different country people live in Huntsville. Like the Southern hospitality, the people is very kindly here. Saturday night or Friday night?
Friday night.
Friday night.
All
We get it done
right.
Friday.
Thank you.
The philosophy is, I normally make the friend
not the customers. The first things, the honesty, then care about each family. Some of them 3-4 generations, they're coming to my shop.
My mother-in-law, she's married, is American. So my husband is the only child. That's why we came from mother. I like it. I just enjoy American. I have 4 children, and my husband had a good job. I had a own business. I just like it, American. Living in American, I like it.
Although widely dispersed, Korean Americans often are intensively networked. 70 or 80% of Korean Americans attend Christian churches, usually Korean Christian churches. Where previously there was only a handful of Korean churches, there now are 4,000 or more.
Cool your heels means?
Churches bring Koreans together while supporting acculturation and English instruction.
Wait, okay. Mrs. Lee, keep your shirt on.
Keep your shirt on means, wait a minute, stay calm.
Okay. What did you study in Korea?
Music. Music? Oh! After learn English, I like become early childhood teacher.
I'm a designer. I came from Korea. 10 months ago.
When did you graduate?
Actually, last week I graduated.
Congratulations! Let's all clap for him.
In the last decade of the 20th century, Korea became a much different place. Koreans demanded and won democratic reforms. Korea quickly emerged as one of the most affluent of nations.
Per capita income has gone from in the hundreds to $10,000 this year. So in the span of less than 25 years, it increased by at least 50-fold. So the primary motive for immigration, which was economic and financial, has ceased to exist for a large number of people.
And A, what's the last kind of dinosaur you saw?
Although Korean immigration to the United States has slowed, it continues, animated as from the beginning by the Korean obsession with education. Schools in Korea systematically teach English, and children often begin after-school tutoring at an early age. As children go up through the grades, emphasis on testing intensifies. In large numbers, undergraduates seek to qualify for American graduate schools. Korean students on American campuses, proportionate to national population, are the most numerous of any national group, by far. Although more likely to return home than before, they nonetheless remain a primal force in the development of Korean America. Korean immigration has often been a two-way back and forth process, and it has become more so.
I was always very proud of my Korean ancestry, but I really didn't know what that meant in a lot of ways. Before it was just sort of, okay, I eat kimchi, that's enough, But now it's like, I gotta understand all the aspects now. The concept of Han, that's the concept of the, where the Korean people are oppressed. And I think my grandparents, of course, had a lot of Han, in their families. And also, of course, there's another term, that concept that I was kind of exposed to, was Hyung, which means the Han and Hyung, you have to have that agony and that oppression, but also the will to move on and to survive. But you have to have the Hyung, which means, yeah, there's a fun part too of life,
Even the adoption of Korean babies to the United States, once such an abrupt one-way journey, now is a more bicultural process.
My grandmother took me to the agency and dressed me up and watched as they took the photograph of me, and I remember her standing by the side and telling me to smile. I was actually the closest to my grandmother, so I think it must have been, maybe even more difficult for my grandma. When I was 7 years old, my mother and grandmother took me to the airport and watched as I boarded a plane for America. At first, I clung to the scent of roasted seaweed and peppery kimchi, the feel of my grandmother's body next to mine, and the last look on my mother's face. In my new home, there was no face that mirrored my own, no one to describe how I got that dime-sized scar imprinted on my left knee. Memories of Korea became little more than blurred visions that flash and skip like a broken movie projector. So I got a fellowship to travel around Asia, so I had the opportunity to come to Korea for 5 days. I'm gonna go back and try to find some records. I told her my Korean name, and she pulled out this folder that had my name written across the top. She said, well, we don't have any information about your mother or grandmother, but we have this old telephone number for your father, which was a complete surprise because I never expected to find my father. The first thing he said was, I'm so sorry that I couldn't do my duties to you as your father. Not a single day has gone by in the past 20 years that I haven't thought about you. And I've carried these photos of you with me for all these years. And I thought, okay, there's no doubt that he's my dad.
150,000 Korean children have been adopted into American homes. Adoptions that once were one-way processes, likewise, have become more of a two-way process.
We visited for about an hour
on Monday.
And then we've been...
And then we traveled and visited the country.
Trying to learn your culture. That's what we've been trying to do. Eat your food. It's very spicy.
I know.
He loves to stuff his whole hand in his mouth. He doesn't like a pacifier. No. Mm-hmm.
What else?
He loves to take a bath.
He loves the outdoors.
Which we absolutely do too.
We have some good resources. We have a good friend who's a grown adult who's a Korean adopted child, and she knows about some Korean camps, and so we would explore that at some point. And we belong to a church where, gosh, there are probably 5 or 8 different adopted kids in a small congregation. So we have a pretty good network of kids that have been adopted that we hope to expose them to.
The idea that we can simply separate the history of the old country from the history of immigration doesn't really work anymore. So in our current transnational globalized world, diasporic histories and national histories really aren't separable anymore. We have to see them as being connected and part of one large global history.
I'm not the only Korean American who've come back to Seoul or Korea to work and do business. I run into fellow Korean Americans all the time, lawyers, bankers, investment bankers, people who are teaching English here, and who are involved in different forefronts to make Korea much more global, international in its outlook.
Businesses rooted in Korea increasingly invest in America. H.T. Chung came to the U.S. with an electronics manufacturer. He stayed on, raising his family as Americans.
미국, Mi is a beautiful, Kuk is a country. I always wanted to go to the United States, and I'd like to work in the United States. That's my dream. My company was established in this area, and I was dispatched as a branch officer, some kind of a total number.
Okay. Yeah.
Koreans
Koreans have only been here for a short time. The bulk of the Koreans have only been here for 30 years or less. So when we look at the kinds of contributions Koreans are already making to American society, we can see how much potential there is for the future. So I think the Koreans are people to watch.
A century ago, the first migrants introduced the ancient culture of Korea to America. In the new crossing, Korean culture is being renewed, adapted, expanded. Despite their numbers, Korean Americans seem destined to be a small minority, widely dispersed across the American landscape. In Hawaii, the oldest of Korean American communities, only 3% of the population is of Korean ancestry. Yet they are among the best educated and most affluent of Hawaii's citizens. The superintendent of public education is Korean American. The Honolulu chief of police is Korean American. The chief justice of the Hawaii Supreme Court is Korean American. Harry Kim ran for mayor of the Big Island on a traditional Korean theme, independence. He returned all campaign donations that exceeded $10.
A guy sends $40 and he goes, my wife puts the name, my son, and me, and my dog. And so you said, you can't do that, a dog, so you send back $10.
He won a landslide victory despite having virtually no Korean American constituents.
We should always be proud of who we are. And I'm very proud to be American. I'm very proud to be of Korean American.
They built a bridge for one to cross to find a better life. But I think that's called silent heroes.
My hope and my dream and my vision is that at the turn of next century, when we are looking back at 200 years of Korean American history, we wouldn't be talking about Korean Americans so much. That Americans will just say, Korean Americans? Oh, I didn't realize you're Korean American. I thought you were American.
I do like Korea. What can I say? I mean, we're great singers and creative people, but, survivors. We're survivors.
The preceding program was funded by the Atherton Foundation, by the City and County of Honolulu, the Freeman Foundation, the Overseas Koreans Foundation, the Hawaii Council for the Humanities, the Hawaii State Legislature, the Korea Foundation, and by more than 300 individuals and families who contributed through the Centennial Committee of Korean Immigration to the United States.